What is CDR? Have you heard about CDR? Do you know why it's important? Should we do CDR? These and many questions are some of the things that we're going to explore in this next episode. My name is Bilha Ndirangu, and this is CDR Plus. So CDR stands for carbon dioxide removal. You might ask, okay, so why does it matter? Why is it important? And the way to think about CDR, as is currently defined in the climate space, is CDR stands for carbon dioxide removal methodologies or any technologies that durably remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's important that we know those two key terms, removing from the atmosphere and durably, because you can do things that remove carbon but take it right back. You can do things that are not as durable, and we'll get into some of those discussions. But it is important to note that it's an action or it's a methodology or a technology that removes carbon from the atmosphere durably. Now that we've defined what CDR is, it's important to also define what CDR is not, because this could actually go in all sorts of directions. And so there are three principles that define what CDR is, or a technology or methodology has to meet for us to consider it as CDR. So one, it has to be a human intervention, and we'll talk about this. Secondly, it has to be an action that actually removes carbon from the atmosphere. And thirdly, it has to be durable. So what this therefore means is something like the natural growth of forests. In as much as those natural forests remove carbon from the atmosphere, we don't consider that to be CDR because that's a natural, it doesn't require human efforts. So afforestation or reforestation that's done by human beings is CDR. Natural growth of forests is not CDR. It's important that the carbon is removed from the atmosphere. So this therefore means things like point source capture, for example, where industries such as cement production or steel production or fossil fuels will sometimes capture carbon at the point of production and sequester it or store it. While that is a point of reducing CDR, or reducing carbon from the atmosphere, that is not CDR. So again, remember there's these three principles. It has to be a human intervention, it has to be durable, and it has to be removing carbon from the atmosphere and not point source capture. Now that we know what the formal definition of CDR is and what it's not, one could ask, why do we have to do it? Why does it matter? Why is it important? Can we just not reduce our carbon emissions? And I think it is critical, and we'll keep reinforcing this. We need to do CDR, but that does not mean we do not need to do reductions. So the first and foremost thing as far as the fight against climate change is concerned, we need to reduce our emissions to as much as possible. We need to figure out how we phase out fossil fuels. We need to figure out how we use better sources of energy, etc. That said, the reason why we need to think about CDR, and it's no longer an option, but now has become something that we absolutely have to think about, is let's step back and think about how did we even get into this place, or how do you get into the position that we find ourselves in. So we know that climate change is caused by greenhouse emissions into the atmosphere, and naturally or historically, nature has always found a way to balance the two. So trees release carbon dioxide into, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere when we breathe, but then there's trees that actually take it up, or oceans actually take it up. So there's always been this natural balance between how much CO2 is being released versus how much nature takes care of it. Then enter the industrial age, and then what then happened is that we started removing carbon dioxide at rates that were fairly unnatural, and this has only increased. I mean, think about the number of cars, the number of industries, and it will only keep increasing when you think about the populations that will keep demanding more and more energy unless we switch our energy. And so what's happened is over time, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gotten to the place where it's a lot more than nature can naturally take care of it. And it was still fine up till a point, and we were still on track to some extent where we could have hit our 1.5 degree target or a 2 degree target by 2100 had we reduced our emissions at some point. But then because we missed a lot of our emissions, our reduction targets, and we're still generating a lot more CO2, it's a big number. We're generating about 51 gigatons of CO2, and that number is poised to increase. We're not reducing as much as we think we should be reducing, so we're still driving a lot more cars. Our industries are still releasing CO2. we've gotten to the point where, and this is important to note, we've gotten to the point where the IPCC, and I'll define what the IPCC is. So the IPCC, the smart guys at the UN, so it actually, IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and this is the UN body made of scientists who essentially study climate change and tell us what's going on from a UN perspective. And so on their latest report, they came out and said for us to meet our net zero targets by 2050, we will need to incorporate CDR in addition to all the reduction targets that we've set for ourselves. So what that means is that countries still have to go in and reduce as much as possible. We have to do the work around driving less cars, or using less fuels, constructing with more sustainable materials, and so doing everything that we need to do to reduce the amount of carbon that we're releasing into the atmosphere. But we've already gotten to the point where we've released too much CO2, so we actually have to remove some of it technologically or using human interventions for us to meet our net zero targets. So CDR, or carbon dioxide removal, has moved from a nice to have, which a few years ago we could have done that because we missed our targets. It's now moved from being a nice to have to a must have if we're going to meet our net zero targets. So always remember this: we have a net zero target that we're trying to get to 1.5 degrees, if not 2. But for us to do that, we have to do all the work in terms of reducing emissions. But now we've come to the point where we actually have to remove some carbon from the atmosphere, so enter CDR. So now that we've established that we do need CDR, I hope I've convinced you of the same. The question would be, what scale are we talking about? How much of CDR do we need to do? And we'll get into different types of CDR technologies, but for now, let's just look at it from how much carbon dioxide we need to remove from the atmosphere. And the precise number will depend on a range of factors. So here, think about if, say, we did nothing as far as reduction is concerned, then of course we need to reduce a lot more. We need to remove a lot more. If we met our reduction targets, then of course it means that we might need, we need to reduce a lot less. But a few numbers that might be important for us to keep in mind. Right now, the IPCC and other experts envision that we will need to remove something. We need to get to the point where we are reducing, or we're removing carbon from, carbon dioxide in the range of between 7 to 10 gigatons. There's some estimates that indicate 4 gigatons, and this is per year, not in full. And so it's anything between 4 to 10 gigatons, could be a lot more per year. And that will take a lot. And the reason why is, let's just think about where we are. Right now, we are removing CO2 at the rate of 2 million tons per year. So it just tells you how new and how nascent this industry is. And so if we are supposed to be, by 2030, we need to be getting to a place where our reductions per year are in the gigaton level, several gigaton level. We're talking about 1,000 to 2,000 scale times. Then we need to scale up by 1,000, 2,000 times where we are right now. So there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to accelerate these technologies, fund them, get them going, get them scaled up. It's an important methodology, important technologies. We've established we need them, but we're still a long, long way from where we need to be for CDR to make the meaningful contribution it needs to make. And so I think that hopefully that begins to give you a sense of just how much needs to get done and the scale at which you'll need to get done. And it needs to be a lot more people doing it than is currently being done. Because if you're thinking about an industry that you have to scale by 1,000 times or 2,000 times, then it's a lot of CO2 that has to come out of the atmosphere. And then again, remember, I say that this is all dependent on how much effort we do on the other end in terms of reduction. So if we continue with business as usual and we keep growing our populations and we keep growing our energy requirements and not changing what our energy sources are, then it means that we might have to do a lot more work to remove the carbon from the atmosphere. So big scale needs to scale really quickly, because again, it's not just a question of how much it needs to scale, it's a question of the time we need to scale it in. Because again, remember, there's a target here, but we need to get to net zero by 2050, according to the experts. So if we do it, but we don't do it by 2050, then we've still missed our target. So it's scaling, but also scaling really quickly and scaling really fast, but also in a way that still ensures that we are being equitable. We are, we're being just, we're being just in terms of how we deploy CDR. Because again, you don't want this to be another solution that then creates problems. As we've seen, a lot of times technologies tend to have unintended consequences. People don't think about that, or because we are rapidly trying to do something, you don't think about what are the effects, what are the side effects, who gets to benefit or suffer through these new technologies. So there's a lot of work that needs to get done, and done really quickly, but also thoughtfully. So finding that balance between finding the scale and at the same time thinking about the fairness, the justness, and the side effects around this, and trying to balance that out is quite important. But tagline is, there's a lot that needs to be done, and it needs to be done very quickly. And so now that we know that we need to do it quickly, and we need to do it in large scale. The question is, what are some things to think about as you evaluate different technologies? And we will have another episode where we talk about different types of CDR and go into more depth about all these different types of CDR methodologies. Every time you hear about CDR or a type of CDR methodology is, one, price. And different technologies have different price points for various reasons. Of course, whether it's what it takes to deploy the technology, how expensive it is, the labor costs, the stage at which the technology is at. And it's an important consideration, because then that limits how much of a technology we can do, because there's only a finite amount of money that there is going into buying these credits. So price is one factor. Another factor is durability. So not all methodologies are created the same. There are some that remove carbon and store it for tens of years. There are some that store it in centuries. There are some that store it essentially permanently. And so increasingly people are looking to pay more for technologies that store carbon a lot more permanently. But of course, those tend to be a lot more expensive. The disadvantage of that, they're more expensive, but then once the carbon is stored, it's not coming back to the atmosphere. The problem with, but the thing is, how quickly can we do that, and how quickly can we scale that? So there might still be room for technologies that don't necessarily store the carbon for as long a period, but then at least it buys us time. So you can imagine, if say we can store carbon for 60 years, then it buys us time before the 2050 deadline. So it's finding that balance between what can we do here and now, but then what can we also do durably. So always remember those two things. There's the consideration between price and durability, and usually you kind of have to balance the two. And sometimes we have to make choices for both. And again, we'll talk about this later, but we're not at a point where we can say one technology is better than the other. I think at the moment we need everything, but we have to find that right balance between how much do you want to focus on durability versus how much do you want to focus on price points. Now, I hope you've learned a little bit more on what CDR is, why it matters, and some factors that you need to consider when you're thinking about CDR. Thank you for listening, and I hope to catch you on the next episode. My name is Bilha Ndirangu, and this is CDR Plus.